Homosexuality has been perceived differently by different cultures throughout time. Mentions of queerness and homoeroticism can be seen in ancient Greek and Indian texts. However, with heteronormativity as the norm, since years, science and society have been trying to understand the origins of same sex desire. Is it an innate desire we are born with? Is it pathological in nature or something we learn as we grow? Could homosexuality be changed or converted? These questions have sparked considerable research and inquiry into the matter, the ethics of which continue to be questionable. Gay conversion therapy or reparative therapy is one such practice that has emerged from the belief that homosexuality can be cured and that the members of the queer community can be treated to be heterosexual. Globally, the practice is prevalent in most countries without any legal limits to it, with only 13 countries banning conversion therapy so far. The techniques and methods used can be as gentle as counseling and prayer service, or as violent as electric shocks, or even forceful consumption of heterosexual pornography. Gurus and Babas have also claimed to have cured homosexuality in our country. Our top medical institution, AIMS, also conducted experiments and attempted to convert sexual orientation of 6 subjects back in 1977. The research was published in 1983 and claimed that it successfully converted 4 out of the 6 subjects. How do we understand conversion therapy? Is there any truth to its success? Should the Indian government ban gay conversion therapy? To explore these questions with nuance, we have with us Mr. Sharif Ragnekar. Mr. Ragnekar is an author, a musician, and an event curator who works to garner support for the LGBTQ community. His book, Straight to Normal, My Life as a Gay Man, is amongst the very few queer memoirs of India. He is the festival director of Rainbow Lit Fest and is also a singer-songwriter, having produced many anthems for the queer movement. Welcome, sir. Thank you for coming to our panel at Argumentative Indians.
Thank you so much, Arzu, and thank you to the Argumentative Indians to have me as part of this discussion today. And it's a very important. Yeah. Can you? I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible, sir. And to start off with, I just like to share that when we were talking about this session and we posted the poster on our social media, the comments were almost surprised that something like this even exists in our country.
True. True. In fact, it's very strange. I think it was a well-known. You're right.
How is your experience?
Okay, Arsu, I think your voice was cracking on a few occasions, but anyway, yeah, you're right, because I receive yeah, now you are. Yeah. It's surprising that I actually have some friends from the community who I would consider aware, who, when I told them this is the discussion we're going to be having on Sunday, they thought it had already been banned. And they just assumed, which is a very important point, they just assumed that when the Indian Psychiatric Society more than once has said that sexuality is innate and homosexuality is innate and it's natural, it's inborn, that still this law sort of, or the doctors, etc., have the license to actually provide such a service, to very clearly homophobic parents or homophobic people who believes their friends or their children can be converted to heterosexuality. I think that is hugely, hugely problematic. I think when we look at this topic, we need to sort of, I think, get one thing very clear is that when 377 was read down,
went wrong with the book.
Yeah, I don't know whether I was heard at that point. No, I'm just saying is that the first thing is that the Indian Psychiatric Society has already made it apparent and has stated so more than once that sexuality is innate, it's inborn. And homosexuality is innate and inborn. It's natural. There is nothing wrong with it. We've also had, maybe less important to some people, that one of the oldest surviving yoga institutes called the Indian Yoga Institute, 1918. One of its doctors has issued statements as recent as 2020 talking about sexuality being natural and there's nothing at all wrong with it. But more importantly, if we look at it, 377, when it was read down, the law earlier used to call carnal intercourse as unnatural sex. When you read that down, you automatically state it is natural, right? It wasn't just about decriminalizing the sexual act, it was about decriminalizing our sexuality, homosexuality. And so really, with that order and with the Indian Psychiatric Society just reiterating in a way what the order had to say, everything else should have flowed from there. Everything else. I mean, and that I'm talking about every possible right and more. And the right to life, the right to dignity. If you go to the privacy order, which is about a year earlier, in August 2017, it's very clear what that bench had to say, that constitutional bench had to say about sexuality. There was a lovely line which I had noted, that privacy includes sexual orientation and is not lost or surrendered merely because the individual is in a public place. So it went beyond the bedroom, it went into every sort of space in life, that you exist with your sexual orientation and you should have that right to be that, to live that. And so really, when you look at all of these things coming from the Supreme Court, and there is enough evidence anyway, then to have such a law in place is an absolute contradiction, because it's essentially a practice that should have gone or could have survived or could have lived in a world where 377 existed, that there were all these crimes being committed against us. There was all that social stigma. Yes, it doesn't go overnight, but the fact is, as I said really earlier, when 377 was read down, there were many things said by the various judges. The most important being that the governments in states and center should have been making people aware. They should have been sensitizing people. And when you say people, it's across walks of life. It includes parents, it includes educationists, it includes the media, it includes every possible, and doctors, obviously. So everything should have really, really gone, seamlessly from there. But obviously, that's not the case. So really, really, the question is, how should we go about banning this, and how should we act, on doctors and doctors who violate very basic human rights, uh, and actually encourage more and more people and encourage parents to actually be homophobic, to be against the rights of their children, to actually not love their children and embrace them for who they are. So that's what we are perpetuating, such a sickening sort of way of bringing children up into this world, and denying them love, denying them dignities, denying them self-respect. Uh, it's sick.
But so, just as you started off with that, a lot of people, even your friends, don't quite know that it's not banned yet.
Yeah.
And there is this, like, not a lot of conversation around this. No, a lot of people don't know much about it. So, is the practice even as prevalent in our country? What has been your experience, and what sort of demographics have you seen this being practiced?
I think, Arzu, I'm really fortunate and lucky. I haven't had to go through this. But even at the time I came out, this is 1999. I think it was a couple of weeks after I came out. Front page, English leading newspaper, journalism of courage, etc., etc., had a report saying homeopathy can cure homosexuality.
Hmm.
Now, 1999 is not very long ago, if
Hmm.
you look at it, right? We were a country which was opening up the economy already 8 years. We were supposedly more aware. Digital was sort of slowly growing within years, but you still had that kind of content going around, and that too on the front page of newspapers. And what I do know is what I got to know from people like Anjali Gopalan, when 2000, when in 2001, Nas moved to the courts with the Lawyers Collective. As you said, there were premium hospitals in South Delhi where kids were being given shock therapy. I'm not sure whether they were already being given hormonal therapy, but they were being given shock therapy. I know even now, and why not even then, I think it was in the 2015 or 16, there was a sting operation by a section, I think it was India Today group, or one of their uh, arms. And there was a debate, which again, Anjali and I were actually part of the debate on TV. Uh, and there were a proud doctor on that panel saying it works, and saying that parents do come and seek the service on a regular basis. So, what I do know is that this hasn't gone away. And there must be a reason why even the Chennai High Court says it should, very recently. There is, it's across. I don't think there's a demographic, and I don't think there is just a socio-cultural or socio-economic part to it. It is way too diverse to generalize which group. I have friends uh, living in Sundanagar, okay, elite Delhi, rich Delhi. I have friends who can't come out and visit Khan Market. Okay, just to give you an idea of the elite. One of my very, very dear friends was telling me that even today, he can't have his boyfriend sit at the same dinner table or lunch table with his parents, particularly his mother. Now that comes as a complete surprise, wouldn't it be? Assuming that we're supposed to be more aware, we're supposed to be better educated. So I don't think education per se is a benchmark to become better people. It isn't. I mean, let's look at climate change, for example. Uh, right. I don't think uh, an address or an income sort of determines your attitude and your approach to life.
Picking from there, in fact, while I was researching,
Hmm.
I came across a lot of these articles and data, and in fact, interviews and memoirs of people belonging to upper class urban spaces that have more resources to access these therapies, to go to these doctors, to go to these therapists, So the parents also have a lot more at stake when it comes to perhaps moral shame or family honor.
Yeah.
And, so when the doctors, even like you said, are claiming that it is successfully converting people or it is something that is scientifically backed, on
Hmm.
what basis are queer communities claiming for a ban? Just, if we could explore the other side, why is it not being banned yet? What makes the doctors continue to practice the treatment?
I think there is. I mean, see, let's be honest. When it comes to the health profession, and I'm taking the risk so I think you're frozen right now. So I don't know whether I'm being heard, but uh, I think it is a business, right? It is a business, and it is a service, and there is a marketplace for it. So, there are a lot of things that we sell, irrespective of doctors, right? We sell all kinds of food, we sell all kinds of lifestyle, we actually have created a system of body shaming of people. It sells. If you sell the idea that beauty is in a certain way and of a certain size of a body, when you keep doing all of these kind of things, it's always about a market. And the market doesn't change until someone takes charge or there is a movement to bring change. So today, if you look at body shaming, for example, I'm just giving that as an example to you, you do find a young generation who's really calling these things out, calling out various brands and products who've been perpetuating these problems. We've had people relook at humor. We've been abusive in terms of the kind of humor we've inflicted and mocked at people who have different abilities or disabled. We've had all those kind of things. So there is always a time, there is always a place, and if there is a market for it, and if there aren't any laws sort of to bring that change, right? Uh, then you're going to just carry on that way, right? It's as much as I was saying is that we are still we don't have enough stories, or we don't have enough uh, lived experiences being shared of being single. Because marriage seems to be like the end all for everyone, and with that comes all the stories around marriage, the romanticization of marriage, the business around marriage, the banking industry and the insurance industry around marriage. So you have that whole system that sort of corners out the whole market, that it gives very little space for anything else. So similarly, if you corner out the whole market and get people to believe that heterosexuality is the norm and everything else isn't, okay, is not normal, is sick, or whatever word you use, then you will perpetuate businesses around it. So you will have not just doctors, but you have gurus, right?
Yeah.
You might have people who say, "My kala, what is that? Kala tika dalunga," or they'll bring that whatever those pujas they do, all of those very things that don't. I mean that sort of creates this sort of homophobic environment
It's
and
interesting.
contributes to it. Yeah.
No, please continue. Yeah.
No, that's it. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
You brought up the idea of kalatika and different sense of puja and, these sort of informal ways or alternative ways of healing that are prevalent. And I'm wondering that if there is an outright ban on conversion therapy, or if there is an outright ban on medical practitioners and hospitals and psychiatrists and therapies to engage with the person's sexual orientation and conversion of that orientation, perhaps the informal sector will pick up. Perhaps these babas, or people who are doing it illegally, and people who are still practicing it because there is a market for it, but then they'll start to do it illegally, and perhaps that would turn out to be even more harmful than what it is at the moment.
No, I don't. I think that, to me, honestly speaking, that's sort of an excuse not to move ahead. I mean, for example, then that's saying don't pay taxes because it perpetuates black money.
Hmm.
But we'll still pay, right? We do believe in nation building, irrespective of what our politics are, irrespective of whichever political party or whether it's a coalition or not. It's your responsibility to do that. And so, similarly, you do have to have certain laws, because just because people drive the way they drive on the streets of the city doesn't mean you don't have laws to to sort of have those checks and balances. Yeah, you'll have a weak administration, or you don't have good enough policing, or you have corruption or something like that. That is going to carry on. That's not going to
Hmm.
go away. But that doesn't mean, again, that the law uh, shouldn't be there in place to protect the interests of people, because laws are deterrents, but law is also to protect.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the most important factor. So I don't. It really doesn't matter whether alternatively there is a group of people who will continue to do that. I'm not saying a law or anyone would say that the law is going to completely or overnight change everything, right? If
Hmm.
it did, we have enough laws on corruption. It would have made us a cleaner nation when it came to that. We have so many fundamental rights in our constitution, then everyone would have toilets, where everyone would have access to healthcare. We have so many things out there, but they're there for a purpose to even perhaps achieve that, to get to that point that it is almost total, you know. But I think we need to understand that, that there will be someone who'll want to break the law. There will
Hmm.
be someone who'll want to break the spirit of humanity. There'll be people who'll break, anything and everything that is they feel is not okay for them, or that's their thinking. But I think, the problem is also we don't discuss phobia sufficiently. We don't discuss the minds of people. These are the differing views.
Yeah.
Uh, like I remember Devdutt Patnaik on the sidelines of the Rainbow Lit Fest saying that why art, and with freedom, art, literature, music, folklore, all of those things, mythology, etc. If we made them more accessible, if we diarized, if they simplified them and brought them more to people, we'd be able to tell them so many more stories of diversity to start with. Not just sexuality, partner, that is there, but just a lot more about, through those stories. But what he also said at that time, I remember, and we recorded it, was that there are people who are homophobic and there are people who are not aware. Like, for example, I could say not just because of the love my mother has, and I have other people in my family, I have fabulous dear friends who come from a time and an era where there was almost nothing available. I didn't have stuff available, but they were available to really find something that validated me, you know. Uh, and so when we started engaging, when we started talking, like my mom has grown with me in my own journey of being gay. Uh, you have to remove that barrier. You have to start with some sort of acceptance and of love, of openness to absorb, right? And I think Devdutt was saying that if we engage more, and if we tell these stories, if we share these lives, if we put ourselves out there, then perhaps it would change notions. I have a very senior journalist friend of mine said that I never knew it was like this. But you're just like any one of us. Okay, and he came from again, when we were talking about demographics or we were talking about socio-economic, socio-cultural, he came from a background where he didn't have that kind of education he assumed that would have, invoked or got a mind to think, to question. Uh, but he was still so accepting. And he comes with an arranged marriage background. Okay, and then like that, there are many. There are many out there. So I think I go back to the one of the points was that what the Supreme Court said. We need to make people aware. We need to break those type of things, and we need to discuss phobia. Why does that phobia come? Why are people not aware? If they even after being aware, or then they have a phobia, then there is another problem. It is a mental health problem that they are suffering from. And in fact, there was a report by Life Science in 2015, which, if I remember correctly, said people who have a strongly negative view of gay people, they have higher levels of psychotism and inappropriate coping mechanisms. So actually, if there is a mental health problem here, it is the homophobics. And so that's largely the heterosexuals, right? So we don't address that because it's inconvenient. The press doesn't address that because it's inconvenient. Because they also have a history of being salacious. They also have a history of using horrendous and disgusting headlines against the community, such as perpetuating the problems. Even in 2003, 2004, when Pushkin Chandra was murdered in Anandlok in Delhi, and there are many more such cases, including the 2001 raids in Lucknow. I'm not saying all the journalists, all the press, but there were large sections, including mainstream English press. So, everyone goes through that journey. You have to open your mind to that, but you have to discuss phobia and why does this phobia exist. We have to return to maybe history. We maybe have to return to even mythology, because if there are people in this country who believes our mythology is part of history, not just as published works, but there was a truth to it. Then if you're going to have conversion therapy, and then if you're going to have queer phobia, that is like homophobia, transphobia, and the rest of it, then you don't have some of our gods. You'll be cancelling some of our gods out, including Vishnu, Shiva. You would have to relook at Ag and Agni. You'll have to relook at Krishna and his role. You'll have to start erasing bits of it because you don't like it today. You know, so I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't have those gods. You can't have those temples. You can't have a Khajuraho. You can't have a Kama Sutra, and then say, "Oh, but you're not fine."
Right.
So I think there is just so much out there that needs to be addressed while we discuss conversion therapy.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a pretty intersectional problem, that on its surface, it appears to be sort of a yes no decision. Should it be banned? Should it not be banned? But as we explore, of course, history comes into the picture, understanding of gender spectrum comes into the picture. And while you were talking, I was also sort of imagining that coming of age for anyone who's trying to make sense of their own sexual orientation, right? Like you mentioned that when you were growing up and when you were coming to terms with your sexuality, you didn't have a lot of narratives around it, right? You did not have a lot of accessible, uh, approachable, different characters around it or different stories around it. And so that perhaps made it even more difficult
Yeah.
to make sense of things. And amidst all of that, then, you know, therapy, I think, does play a very important role for anyone to make sense of their own sexuality, not just for homosexuals, but also for heterosexuals, for anyone. Considering as a society, we don't talk about sex as much, we don't talk about these desires as much. So, then I wonder if conversion therapy could, or a ban on conversion therapy could coexist with accessible therapy for issues like gender dysphoria or just understanding sexual orientation, because that accessibility is very important, and a blanket ban on conversion therapy perhaps might lead to therapists or doctors refraining from addressing these questions with adolescents who want support.
No, I think again we go down to awareness. I don't think it's a blanket anything. When we're dealing with conversion therapy, we're really talking about sexual orientation.
Hmm.
We're not necessarily talking about gender identity or transition or transgender or non-binary. We're not talking about that necessarily. We are talking about here assuming that heterosexuality is the norm, and so anyone homosexual is, it's needs to be converted back,
Hmm.
sort of, so to say, to the norm or become part of the norm. Now, I think everything can coexist. You have to have that ban. And when you have that ban, it legitimizes or it sort of reassures people that there are people beyond heterosexuals. That anyone coming out or sort of discovering their sexuality or realizing that they aren't like their parents,
Hmm.
and assuming the parents are heterosexual and not forced into a marriage with different sexualities and then expected to take drugs or whatever and then produce children.
Hmm.
So let's imagine that okay, it wasn't that true for most parents. uh, then child can still seek help to understand sexuality, to understand sexual orientation, to understand the fact that there are millions out there, who are like you, and sort of helps you through traversing that sort of space, and that world, which is dominated by someone else, or a different sexuality in this case. Now, at the same time, these counselors, these, health experts, these psychologists, they have to be clear affirmative. They need to understand the spectrum of sexuality to start with.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they have to be in that. I think that was very well put by the High Court judge in Chennai also, who
Madras, yeah.
decided to seek assistance and help to become more aware. Right? What an example to set. I mean, that's an example that I mean we should be exceedingly proud of. I wish there were more such judges around, more such people around.
Hmm.
And I think so. I think it's not the banning this will not create that problem. It will not deny people. So I don't think we should even be discussing that as such, because that is it, it's not needed and it won't happen. There are countries which have banned it. There are countries which can ban it, and we can too.
Hmm.
And I think it was very well thought out as to why that ban should happen. Yes, when you do that ban, you need to make more people aware of why you're banning it, and need to make people aware of gender dysphoria. You need to make people aware of the spectrum of sexuality. You need to make psychologists, health experts, mental health experts, etc., aware that these are the scope of things that you can continue to do. All that needs to go out. The guidelines need to be there. The guidelines, even on what the doctor does, needs to be there. What the doctor needs to tell parents when they come to them and say, "Can you convert my child?" What does that doctor do? The ban can't
Hmm.
be in isolation and just say, okay, we ban it. And what does the doctor do? How do we act if a doctor is violating the law? Is there, so there's so much out there. Should they lose their license? Should they be suspended for a period of time? Should they go through queer formative sort of, do they need help? Are they suffering from psychotism?
There's a Supreme Court order already, I think a few years back, that any medical practitioner, if they are found to be practicing or administrating any form of treatment for conversion of a sexual orientation, they are liable to penalty or they are liable to misconduct. So that is already present in our legislation, and also with the Mental Health Act of 2017. Any person who's coerced into any form of mental health treatment or forced into it can then sue their practitioner. So these are certain laws and legislation that are already existing that can be accessible for anyone who is being forced into conversion therapy. Why do you think an additional ban is then necessary?
Well, I think it needs to be, the law needs to be, the order needs to be complete. You see, we have a lot of Supreme Court verdicts and orders which are not being seen through by various governments over a period of time, right? The courts have also talked about plurality long ago, in the 90s. And it talked about a broadcast regulatory authority. It talked about representation. It talked about different voices. It talked about so many things.
This is legislation, sir. This is not just
No, but I'm just saying, yeah, you're talking about the mental health legislation. Now, to see that legislation through, it has to go through all of these various bodies which govern the space of healthcare, of doctors, of their licenses, etc. Anjali had put in a complaint, I think it's 2015-16, and I reported on it for Scroll at that time. Nothing came of it, not even a reply. You see, so if a law isn't, we have laws on anti-bullying, we have all these kind of things, but if a school doesn't follow it and the administration doesn't follow it through, and I think it's that is one major part of it, irresponsibility in these various authorities. The other is the media failing us. That when you're discussing even farmer suicides, we should discuss mental health. Why do we only discuss it when it's an elite issue? When an actor comes and says, I'm depressed. Why aren't we discussing it when it's impacting so many other people? Why do you make it so elite and almost like part of a certain section of society? And it's not like us. You get people to believe like that. When you have these laws, we should be checking those laws. We should be seeing whether those laws are being executed, implemented, whether they're following through. We have campaigns on same-sex marriage. We'll have hashtag this. We'll have various other campaigns and hashtags on various other popular sort of narratives. But we don't have them on the ones which really, really matter, which give you that foundation and security. We don't have them on suicide. How many people have discussed and how many papers have carried the number of stories on let's say very recently R.V. Malhotra, who died of suicide, where there are a lot of questions been raised on the school, a premium school, a lot of allegations made against the school, where the mother itself of that child, Aarti Malhotra, was a teacher in that school. She lost her job because she raised questions. Now, where is the press picking this up? This is going to be repeated. This is being repeated. Post 377, according to some people told, from NAS and from Humsafar Trust, there are more cases of suicidal tendencies of people committing suicide or dying of suicide after 377. There is also a pushback from society. And that pushback will keep happening. And there will be more and more hate crimes until you have enough laws being protecting the people. To find love, to get love, doesn't happen if you're going to live in fear all the time. You're never complete. You're never whole as a person. You're never what everyone likes to use now in the corporate world, authentic. Right? Because you're constantly living under fear. A large number of people live under fear. Why did an IIT kid in 2020, February, I think, die of suicide? Why did that kid in Chennai? There was another friend of mine who was in the fashion world, okay, within 2 months of that order. So, things don't change until you execute them and see them through. Things don't change until the media and all these estates that have influence, you know, don't actually echo that out and tell you that story and cover those dots so that you feel safe in some sort of circle of influence. So I think we have that problem inherently there when it comes to our community, but it is something that seems to be a problem, an endemic problem in this country when it comes to various laws. you know and it is not to do with one government or another, one political party or another. No, it is coming from a long time.
Amidst all this violence and this deep trauma psychologically, and I was also reading up on another report, especially after Anjana Harish's death due to conversion therapy, that uh, members of the queer community are 2% more vulnerable to suicide than their heterosexual counterparts. Uh, and I was wondering that if there is that sense of trauma, that sense of violence around the identity, and there would be the sense of perhaps even desire to just be heterosexual to fit in because of the violence that takes place all around, because nobody else is accepting you. So I was just curious if there is any, in your experience, any cases of voluntary exploration to conversion where people want to explore their own heterosexuality or explore the transition or explore the conversion through these different therapies.
There are people like that I've heard, so I don't know them personally. But I also know people, a friend of mine who feared honor killing. He came from one of those families, and he was dead sure that he'd be found out living in Delhi, although his family is somewhere in Haryana. And he got married, and he's had a child, and but he lives a parallel life. Okay. Now there are people who are bisexual. That's a different thing we're talking about. Okay? And I'm not even going into the fluidity discussion. Yeah. Um, there are people. I remember writing a whole piece for Hindustan Times, 2015-16 maybe. There was this case of a person who worked with Infosys. And Newspaper 377 was read down, and 377 was used because that man was forced into a heterosexual marriage, and he submitted to that heterosexual marriage because he couldn't see any other options. There's so much else linked to giving in to parental pressure and what parents want. Um, and obviously those families, and there are many like that who are loveless families. There's so much virtue attached to duty rather than love and emotions and affection and care. The wife suspected that the husband is gay and was wondering why he's not having sex, why they aren't having children. She got CCTV cameras put in the house when she was traveling. She used that footage. So, I'm digressing here, but what I'm trying to say is there are many such cases that continue to happen here. There are many people I know, it's just that, why do I have to go through this? Why? I wish I was born straight. I wish I was born heterosexual. They may or may not choose to go in for conversion therapy. They also know that conversion therapy doesn't work. But they would sort of conform and fit in just so that there is no violence. And I sometimes shudder to think what lesbian women go through because they don't have the privilege of being a man. I identify with my assigned gender, so I am cisgender gay, right? And as a cisgender gay man, I might not look as, in common language, visibly gay, to some people. And I might have a lot of women friends with me, so I might appear to be, part of the general set of heterosexual people. I could get married and go and explore my sexuality outside of gay bars, on chat sites, while traveling, etc., 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 etc. I can do all of that. We've seen it in our community, the number of married men coming to gay parties, you know. So I wonder what happened to women in a situation like that where they don't have this option at all. Not that this is a great option at all. I'm not even encouraging this option at all. Not at all. Not at all. That should never be the case. The the fact is that these are the circumstances that people are pushed into. And these are the regrets also some people carry, that because of homophobia, because of having to conform and fit in to what families want, what parents want, and the social stigma attached to homosexuality, which is changing in small little bits here and there. But uh, that they would want to be considered normal, and if they can't be considered normal as a gay human being, some of them would want to be born heterosexual, so that they don't have to go through this hell. And so I think that exists, that is there. I mean, you know, I mean, it's a really sad part of life.
So, do you think the ban on gay conversion therapy would benefit the situation or deteriorate it further? Considering, on one hand, it might benefit that it reassures the community that it's okay and you don't need to convert. And on the other hand, it also restricts possibilities of exploration, it restricts that dialogue that, oh, you know, could that fluidity exist?
No, I think the dialogue has nothing per se to do with. You can still have the dialogue. We could have had the dialogue. We've had the dialogue on homosexual rights, or about sexuality, about trans community, even before the laws changed. Nothing changes a dialogue. A dialogue makes people more aware, gives you different perspectives, brings you different lived experiences. Like today, you're talking to someone who belongs to a home where he's not had to go through so many of these other things. I've had my fears, I've had suicidal tendencies, they've come back to me at different points in time. I've had depression, I've had all of that. But I still had a shelter, I still had a home, I still had a loving family, I still had a loving mom with me and brothers, right? Now I am upper caste. Okay, I've had access to a system, I have access to a language which gives me privilege as well. Now, when we have dialogues, those dialogues have to be wholesome and not elite alone, not to invalidate a section of society. But those dialogues have to include the rainbow spectrum. You have to understand intersex and not mix it up with trans. You have to understand asexuality, but there's still love there. You have to understand choice. Yeah, there's so much out there that needs to be done, and you have to understand gender roles as well when you have these debates, right? That the man doesn't have to always be the bread earner and the provider. Man doesn't have to be described in the way they get described mostly in Bollywood cinemas, heroes in trash and bang everything, masculine in that sense, muscular in a certain way, brutal in a certain way. We have to understand the narration. We have to understand the fact that there are so many dimensions to each being. I think no law can stop us from those discussions and debates. We discuss corruption while it happens, and we have a law. So you have to have the ban to protect people, to let people know also that being gay, being homosexual is normal. There's nothing wrong with it. You don't have to convert to anything. You just are the way. I hate to sound cheesy, but you're born this way, as Lady Gaga would say. But and 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 that's what it is. So when you're born in a certain way, and you have a voice, then you feel free. You open automatically to love and to all the beauty that you can have as a person and in this world. So we have to free that sort of a thing. And in that freedom, we have to have, as you're saying, these discussions that we're having right now. Because if we don't, because we learn. When I only knew homosexual and hijra and heterosexual. It was, but I didn't understand the landscape of what it is to be transgender. I didn't understand trans man, trans woman at the point in time. I didn't know what it is to be queer femme until I started interacting with people and having those discussions. Until we had those conferences, until we had those parties and these community groups, the NGOs, etc. I didn't know of that. I didn't know of intersex. I didn't know of asexuality. I didn't know and why and when. I mean, at one point, I didn't know why we adopted the word queer, but then I understood why we did, and then I love it for what it is. And so, you have to have that journey of discussions. That's how. Today they're saying that there are approximately 20 sexualities, right? There's pansexual, there's sapiosexual, there's so many other sexualities within the thing. And I think people need to feel a sense of belonging with those identities that they carry, even though eventually everyone may want to be fluid and may choose not to be fluid. That will come innately, right? You'll explore it yourself. So I think uh, any form of conversion, even tomorrow, conversion within the spectrum, this should not be encouraged, should not be allowed.
So what you're suggesting here is, a lot of autonomy to practice your sexuality, a lot of autonomy to have that freedom of expression, to really love the way you want to love, to hold the kind of desire that really feels connected with you. And a lot of it is such an intimate part of a human being, right? It's an extremely intimate journey.
Yes, it is.
And it's what's interesting here is that that sense of intimacy then gets intertwined with the state, with the government and legislation, because there is that sense of public political identity also that it carries. And how much can the state then interfere, or how much should the state then interfere? Because at times you also fear senses of dogma or authoritarianism, that should the state intervene too much into an individual's private matters or intimate matters? So what's your take on that?
See, I think the state should stay out of private life and the bedroom and choices of love, etc. Obviously, the state
But
steps in.
legalizing is also state intervention, isn't it?
No, it's the interpretation of the Constitution. You have a duty towards your Constitution. So I think let's look at it that way. Because, parties come and go. Elections happen every few years, every 5 years, unless the government falls. So I think the state has to stay out of these sort of choices. They have to stay out of the choices of what a family is. They have to, if you go by research, 10% of all court cases that are stuck and clogging the courts are family disputes. So let's get real to the fact the family is not that great anyway, but the fact is there isn't one structure also any longer to a family, right? You include pets. You sometimes kids are growing up with grandparents. You have in certain parts of India, and not only in India, in the subcontinent, where children are being brought up by communities, like it used to happen long before industrialization. So that you have biological parents, but you're going to be brought up by someone else or brought up by many people at the same time. So I think the state needs to just stay out of this. We have to separate laws from the state, because the moment you look at the state as in, let's say, a state government, then you're attaching the police. We're anyway arguing for a long time in this country that the police should be detached from the government, should it be all the investigative bodies and all of that. So policing is about a law. The law comes and stems from a constitution, right? I know laws change depending on society, culture, but media debates, etc. Cases are reopened. All of that keeps happening, right? There are those influences, no doubt. That's why I was saying we need the media to be more responsible towards ourselves. Love is not a matter of anyone other than the individual.
But then this is one sort of
yeah. It isn't. You will have security or the social constructs that around that love, So the social constructs also need to sort of change to to accept that. But that's changing. There are already courts saying certain things. The point I'm making is we should not look at every law as to do with state and interference. The laws are part of creating a construct that helps people protect their interests. Right? It's as much as the Marriage Act, if you want. It's as much as, my right to life. It's as much as consent, marital rape, abortion, cesarean, kids, okay, plastic surgery, cosmetology, whatever else you want to do to yourself, right? There have to be laws to give you that choice to do all of this. The right to own my body, the right to love, the right to choose my partner, the right to live on my own, to live on my terms. That's where the law comes in. That is not interference. That's creating that system and that culture and the ecosystem for love to flourish, for people to make those choices. It is this ecosystem that interprets the Constitution of India. Now, if the Constitution of India was written differently, then perhaps we would seek amendments to that. And there have been many amendments to the Constitution over the years, right? So everything stems from there. It has nothing per se. The state should respect that Constitution. And then the legislature has to play that role, which it doesn't. We know it. And that's where the courts also come in. And that's why the Supreme Court is expected to interpret the Constitution when it does. Pass a verdict. So I feel governments can be contested. Let's look at some of the laws that have changed. Sati, dowry. I think, telling you when we spoke a few days ago that I think it was 1956 or 59 in the Hindu Marriage Act. A man could have multiple wives. And he didn't necessarily have responsibility to all the kids that were born of those marriages to various wives. He could pick. It's not really long ago that changed. Right? We used to always see the government as opaque, but right to information did happen.
Yeah.
We've had so many laws changed over a period of time. And some must come from the government. They do. But again, government interference should be only in the protection of people's rights. That sense. That it puts that matrix in place and then makes sure that that the policing system, the judiciary, it can't play a role over the judiciary, but it ensures that at least the policing system, the investigation agencies ensure that all of that functions. So you have laws that are not state interfering, but on domestic violence, on violence against children. There are all of those laws in place, but the government doesn't step in on a day-to-day and say, hey, listen, you can't, bash this person up, you can't hit this person, or you shouldn't. There is a law already. There is a court out there.
With conversion therapy per se, if we focus the conversation on that specific conversion or that specific therapy, I was also, so a lot of families push their minors into such therapies more often, according to whatever I've read online about it. And in such cases, then perhaps conversion therapy doesn't just belong in those professional spaces, like even I was talking about the informal sector earlier, but what about the general family and social influences? When you're growing up in a family where your parents are constantly asking you to get normal or to be normal or to behave or to behave in a certain way or to conform to a certain heteronormativity, does that also then fall into the ambit of conversion? Does that also then fall into the ambit of legality? And does the state or the executive institutions of the state have the power, or should they have the power, to intervene in the internal family dynamic?
I think, you see, the state can intervene only if there is a law in place as such, right? Or there is something that you would call national security, and there are certain powers given to the state and its various arms, you know. Um, I think I would prefer, I mean, we may even come to that point, a very important point that you're raising, that we may have laws where children can go and invoke those laws, or there could be others whose children, interact with, who invoke a law against the parents, you know. But again, I would say, you can have all those laws, but we do violate many of them, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Now, it does come down to a culture, and where does the culture really emit from? It's the law, the legislature, yes, but it's the press, big chunk. It's the educational institutions and what you learn in schools and colleges. You know, it is influences in terms of cinema. All of these sort of create an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think if that is not being addressed, you can have, and we must have the law. I'm again saying we must have the law. And we might have to have a law where the child can actually go and, invoke. We've had cases, I think, recently where a neighbor raised a question on a kid who was put out in the sun as punishment, right? On the roof of home somewhere in Delhi only, actually. And then the police came and played. Something was invoked, some section of some act, IPC or whatever, was used for that matter. So maybe we do need those. Maybe we need some of that also on place. But the ideal situation, which is obviously tough, is for people to become more aware. It is for parents to sort of understand. And parents will be, sometimes parents also react out of fear, not of the child being who they are, what could happen to the child if the child is different from the others, right? So then they hope, and they sort of try and get you to change so that you fit in and you don't face that violence. Some of that fear also comes from there, but some of it comes from believing that the child isn't okay, right? So I think if we don't have these other influences that change the way people think, and we don't have those discussions, we don't have the awareness, and it's not limited to, like, one section of digital media or whatever. It has to be a little more widespread. It has to be, I mean, if we had a panchayat system come in, we've had all of those, we have Grameen workers, we've had all of this happening over the country. It has to be down at that level because they grow up into the same system, and it has to be a bottom top rather than a top bottom in the thing. Because I remember for a long time, and there have been arguments till even a few years ago from some politicians who believe that homosexuality is not culturally from the subcontinent, and they also believe it's a Western import. And there was a time that when that we were often seen with the fashion fraternity and the ad world, which was all very Western, all very English, all very sort of elite, and this thing. So it was seen as detached from the rest of the nation. And so we carried the tag, or actually, of being a lifestyle rather than something natural, because lifestyles are adopted. That would be their argument. But so we need something that is takes us along. I think what was very interesting in the 2018, in the evidence that was produced, was this book, Same Sex Love in India, which was Ruth Vanita and Salim Kidwai. And that goes into the Persian era in India, the Arabic, Muslims, Hindus. There are stories from UP, there are stories from various parts, there are scriptures being invoked, there's so much out there about queerness that it's strange that you want to pick and choose what you consider your history to be also, and that again takes us back to the question of education and awareness, the role of the most influential bodies, of the press and of the government playing the role, across states and at the center, to make people aware, to educate them.
Yeah.
If you do take people along, you make this country more prosperous.
Yeah.
You do, and prosperity doesn't have to be in money. It also comes from peace. It does come from a certain placidity and quietness. That's what frees you, and that's so inherently subcontinental.
And with the culture that you're invoking here, and when you're talking about histories, you're talking about mythology, you're talking about uh, the kind of relationship that we have with queerness or with homosexuality in terms of a bottoms up approach. That when each and every individual, no matter in what corner of the country they are, they're able to engage with it. And then cultures are also shaped so heavily by our belief systems, by our
Yeah,
faiths. And I was again reading up this article on how a lot of people also believe it's a part of their belief system, religious belief system or faiths, that homosexuality is a sin, or homosexuality is something that will not allow you to be in the good books of the divine, or it's not something that is permitted by the divine. And then they claim that, or it is claimed that, to be able to pray for heterosexuality, or to be able to hold conventions or to hold interventions for people who are queer, is a way of for them to practice their religion, which is a right that they want to continue to practice. So they might invoke, or they might consider this ban to be limiting to their practice of the religion.
yeah. I'll listen. I am not an expert on Islam or an expert on Hinduism. Hinduism is so vast anyway, or on Christianity or on Buddhism and various other. I think we need to. There are reports that I have read that it was 1946 or 47, around that time, that there were sections of the Bible that were rewritten, which included making homosexuality a sin. Now, again, I'm saying I'm not an expert on that, but I have read that. I've
Hmm.
also seen documentaries on Islam where, again, homosexuality was at a certain point in time in history, maybe, into was considered sinful, or against humanity, against being natural, everything that is supposedly wrong. But I think we also need to understand a few other things when we look at uh, a lot of these narratives and interpretations of religion. And I say interpretations because there's always time and place and culture,
Yeah.
right? We can pin so much on the Victorian era that we've been through. We can even talk about our foods and the influences from various different groups of people who've been in the subcontinent. You know,
Hmm.
we can debate endlessly on the idea of India because it has changed from time to time. So keeping that in mind, which is absolutely a truth and a fact, you have to understand that in most cases, all our religions get interpreted by men,
Yeah.
and that will tell you how they treat women to start with. And then when you go for women, you go to queer. Now, I can pick up anything and I'll say God wants produced us as equal.
Hmm.
So, what is the subtext you're coming with? And why are you interpreting that subtext in that way, right? You can argue anything out in that. But if you're going to hold power, and mostly men, right? Even even in Buddhism, which is sort of more liberal, etc., there are monks out there. But I've seen, at least in Thailand, the impact of their own history and having not been colonized, they are more open to queerness. And
Hmm.
Theravada Buddhism that they follow just sees everyone as equal. But there are, again, limitations in that, But cultural nuances and cultural impact of how they look at life changes things, so I feel that religion will continue to play a role, and there will always be, um, people who will come in the way. I think in the US, if I remember, during the same-sex marriage cases that came out, one of the judges said that, okay, you don't want to have the marriage in the church, don't have it in the church.
Hmm.
So you don't want to have it in a a church here, you don't want to go to a mosque, you want to go somewhere else, you don't want to do it in a temple, or you don't want to go somewhere else, just do it where you want. Right? What we are arguing about is a constitution, and a constitution is a religion in its own self. It is, you have to have faith in that constitution, and for that faith to survive, you have a system in place to make sure it does. So you can be a believer in anything, and you'll have these interferences. But that's the reason why you have democracy. That's the reason why you want the separation of the church from the state, and therefore any religion from the state. And you would want all those tenets that are there, but free people, and gives them that sense of being an equal citizen. That is more important. That's why again you have the judiciary, in place. So I think we're going to have not just religious leaders, we're going to have spiritual leaders. We'll still have some doctors who build a business around it. See, we all know that even religion has become a business. We all know that even the politicization of religion is a business. We know every aspect or walk of life has a business aspect to it. So they see a market, they're going to do it. So you have to change the market, and that comes back to the same point we I think repeated, is awareness.
Yeah.
Taking it out, having those laws, protecting people's interests. It's never going to be complete, because freedom is also never complete. So and queerness is always evolving. Greatness of queerness is that. So you're going to have these groups. You're going to have, but like, let's talk about, if people believe that Vedas are Hindu, for example, it talks about a vinaya work. Vinaya, there's no form; it's the soul. I have friends who've had marriages, Hindu marriages, who've where the pujari. I know you can buy any pujari by and large. Just pay them and say, "Acha date bhi badlo marriage ke liye, horoscope also gets changed." All of that. Okay, I'm just saying it in a very lighter sort of way.
Right.
But that pujari said he talked about the two souls getting married. So he took it beyond the form of two men in that case. So I think that's why we also have a special marriage act. Let religious groups say whatever they want. Let parents say whatever they want. To have a special marriage act for that. So I think religion also changes. We've seen the Pope change and say certain things. Talked about compassion, about living relationships at a point. So you can. We've had even some Hindu fundamentalist leaders at one point and say, yeah, I think we shouldn't criminalize them, but they did say, yeah, I think there's still a mental disorder about it, right? But so so you've had different people say different things at different times.
Do you see a similar dynamism when it comes to science or the scientific communities who are still exploring or still researching on homoeroticism or homosexuality?
I think I feel that science and that research is important sometimes for a reference point. But I think it will be more interesting to go into the history of how there was a point in time, if you read, in the 1920s, early 20th century, where heterosexuality was not looked upon with as much reverence as it is today in a nation like the US. And why I bring in America here or bring in UK sometimes, because colonization is in different forms. Globalization is also colonization. So you in that history, there was I've read about the oppression against colored people and brown people, and they were more liberal, they were more free, etc. They were more so a lot of the sexuality and the expanse of sexuality and the wonderfulness of sexuality was actually practiced more easily amongst them than the elite white, skinned people. And that's how things started to sort of change, what became the norm. There was also this obsession of procreation, inheritance, and legacy. which also continues now even in an Indian thing. So that sort of everything started getting structured around that. You know, there was, as I said earlier, there were businesses that were around that, wills structured around that, laws structured around. Everything started making that sort of the norm also. And there is more to that history. There's a lot more to that history. Um, and I don't know it all, obviously. There's a lot coming out also now. So I feel it's important that when we are researching these things, not bring everything down to science only. I think we need to bring it down to history and literature. We have to bring it down to lives and communities and culture. Because if you look at a large part of the subcontinent, we have handed things down. We have a lot of oral history. And today you're also seeing books coming out on oral history on, let's say, partition, for example. Right? So we have a lot of oral history. We've had an era where we didn't even record and document Ayurvedic practices, and we didn't document biodiversity in seeds in this country. It started happening much later. So you had a lot of people exploiting it or invisibilizing it as well. And they were choosing what stories they wish to tell. If you see most of the histories by men. Now today we're suddenly discovering there's more than Rani Rasi. There are many more women who were this thing. But someone decided to pick only her, not to say that she didn't play a role. But I'm just saying it was down to like one sort of person, right? We're re-looking at who all were part of our freedom struggle. There's so many more people. So history has to be looked at in that, because if we understand nature also, nature is science, though the environment is science. We may want to research it, and we do, and we should. We will look at how things happen, how the five elements sort of function, and what does the imbalance cause. We're understanding those things, we're researching those kind of things. But I think it's important to look at history and broaden what history is, and include all of these sort of stories for us to start understanding that we did exist. Why can't we then also examine heterosexuality and why it became a norm? Why don't we do science on that? No? Why don't we do a history study on that? Why don't we do why don't we ask ourselves the question that today people are saying that it will take 32 years for women to get equality, for gender equality to actually happen? Why aren't we examining who wrote those laws? Who wrote that system? Who influences that system? That everything you think about equal is to be equal to the man. So we need to just tell the man to calm down for a while, to shut up for a while, and let others speak. As a lot of people from minority groups would say, hand the mic. Let us have our histories also. And you can keep researching and finding evidence. Fair enough. But we can't wait for evidence for everything.
So you believe that
the Constitution didn't have to wait for evidence.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, sir. And it's interesting how moving beyond science and going back to culture and history and having more of an intersectional view again becomes so important when it comes to something that is related to people's personal identity, these very private and intimate choices that play a role in public politics.
Yeah.
Any closing words that you would like to share, sir, just to wrap up the session for today?
I would just say is human beings are part of nature. And nature has so many dimensions to it. If we look at trees, for example, there's not one kind. If we look at flowers, there's not one kind. If you look at water, it doesn't have one form, right? We give it different names. We're very much part of that. And if the laws clearly says that we're natural, then you need to accept and recognize that you're as natural as we are, and we are as natural as you are. And I think that's all I would say, that's the dignity with which we need to treat each other and engage with each other. And that's all. Then you don't need to, have conversion of this and conversion of that and all that stuff. You should be having that. That's robbing someone of dignity. That's robbing someone of their naturalness. That's all I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for this session. And thank you to everyone who's watching. And
Thank you so much.
thank you, sir. We'll keep exploring these topics in different sessions that we have, and we hope to continue to question these beliefs and question legislation and different narratives of the culture. Thank you so much for being a
Thank
part
you
of
so
this.
much. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good night.
Good night.